Welcome, warriors. Today, I am blessed to speak with a wife and mother who has more than 27 years of sobriety. Grab a tissue and hear the story of how alcohol took her breath away. Let's rock.
Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words.
Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. Christy Walker is a wife, mom of 3, and a Catholic sobriety coach. She's a speaker and the host of the Catholic Sobriety podcast. Having lived an alcohol-free life for over 27 years, she specializes in helping other Catholic women experience alcohol freedom so they too can enjoy living fully present, fully alive, and fully claiming their true identity in Christ. But before we hear Christy's story, here is a review from Deb, all the way from Australia. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for bringing this incredible podcast to the world. You are amazing. Great info, a must listen. You are so kind, Deb. I really appreciate those beautiful words. And thank you for listening all the way in Australia. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your star ratings and your comments help people to find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. And then please also share the show, whether you share a single episode or you share the podcast in general. Every single share helps the podcast to grow, and it may just help the person that you're sharing it with. So thank you. Now come join our Warrior Words Facebook community for inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. Just go to Facebook. Yes, facebook.com/groups/warrior words. When you request to join, after you click that button, a couple questions pop up. Just answer those. And then I will look forward to getting to know you a little better in the community. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. As you heard in the intro, we are blessed to have Christy Walker with us today. She is the Catholic sobriety coach. Welcome to the Warrior Words podcast, Christy.
Thank you so much for having me here, Heather.
I am glad we were able to coordinate our schedules and get this recorded. And you and I have something in common. Well, first of all, our Catholic faith and also sobriety. And I have mentioned my couple decades of sobriety, and I hear you are the same. So would you share your sobriety story with our listeners today?
Absolutely. And congratulations on your sobriety as well. It's definitely a journey as you know and have experienced yourself. So for anyone who's out there kind of going through it, just know that, you can go through it and there's lots of ups and downs, but it's so worth it in the end. I always tell everybody my worst day sober is far better than my best day when I was out drinking. So just take that as encouragement. So I guess I'll just kind of start at the beginning. My parents got divorced when I guess I was about 6 years old. So that's probably the beginning of the trauma and the all of the things that happened that led me to where I am today. It was a very difficult situation, actually. I was a pretty happy kid. I could sense that there was something not right with my parents. I remember telling them, like pushing them together and saying, love each other, like, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. They wouldn't fight or anything. I just could sense this like separation between them growing and growing. And I didn't really know what to do with that because I was a kid and
Right.
I didn't understand what was going on. But then I have this vivid memory. It's so vivid of sitting, like my mom was like, you guys need to go in the living room. We need to tell you something, tell you and your brother something. And I had grabbed, this was in like the morning, and I had grabbed a box of ginger snap cookies and nobody stopped me. So I was like so excited. So my brother and I were like sitting on the couch eating these ginger snap cookies. And my dad comes in. My mom was like in the other room, but I could see her and she's just crying. And my dad told my brother and I that he was moving out, basically, that he was leaving. And I didn't really get what he was saying. I'm like, wait a second, why can't you like work it out? And my brother was so little, he didn't really understand what was going on, I don't think. But I was just like, no, this can't be. And I was like so mad at him. But then I was mad at my mom because I was like, what did you do that like drove him away, you know? And it was just this really, like, I could still feel all those feelings of just like tension and anger and not understanding. And my dad basically like picked up his stuff and left. And here we were, the three of us just left with the aftermath of him deciding that he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore. He had actually, I found out later, had an affair with a coworker. So he left my mom for her, moved in with her and her daughter, which didn't help the situation because I was like, why did you leave our family to have be with this other family? And it just was very, very difficult. And then my mom was young. She's this young mom left with these two little kids, a mortgage. She had mostly been a stay-at-home mom. So she's just, of course, just devastated because she loved my dad too. So she's devastated. I'm devastated. My brother is devastated, I guess, but he was pretty young. So I don't know really what he was going through. And I had so much anger, like against my mom at times because I thought it was her fault, but yet I was mad at my dad for leaving. And I started to just be like, okay, how can I fix it? And this is where like self-reliance creeped in because before I was just like happy and trusting and like, you know, whatever happens, happens. Pretty soon I got into this mode of how can I get them back together? How can I get my family back? And I would pray. And my grandma, my maternal grandparents were very involved in our life. And my grandma, whenever we went past like a fountain or something, she would give my brother and I pennies to like throw into the fountain. So we would throw pennies into the fountain every time I would wish that my parents would get back together. And I would say it out loud. And she's like, oh, honey, like, I don't know. But in that moment, I now realize looking back that I was like, I have to do it. God's not going to do this for me because I had been praying and I felt like, oh, he's not listening to me. Obviously, he can't hear me, or maybe he's got too many people, you know, talking to him. So he doesn't have time
Right.
for me. So that's
Mhm.
fine. I'm going to figure this out. So then I started like penny wishing, wishing on stars. And that's kind of when some like new agey stuff started creeping in as maybe crazy as that sounds as at such a young age. But I started to think like two things. One, God doesn't really care that much about me. And he's there for me. I never stopped believing in God. I just thought he just wasn't really interested in me, or maybe my problems weren't a priority for him. And two, that maybe he wasn't powerful enough to do what I needed him to do.
Yeah.
And this is just kind of how my life went. I just feel like from that moment on, I was constantly striving. I was constantly trying to control situations and make things happen. And it's a very exhausting place to be
Yes,
honest with you.
yes. But if I can interrupt just a minute, I think, you
Yeah.
mentioned you were really young at this time. I think you said around 6. And I think that some of those things are very natural thoughts for a child of that age. Well, I have to do it. And, your faith is not fully formed. You haven't hit the age of reason. The church says 7, I believe it is. And so I think it's a natural progression to think, well, I can't see God. He's not really here. He let my parents get divorced, and I have to do something. And
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's a natural, kid response. So, okay, I will,
Yeah.
I'll let you continue. Which is something that
Yeah.
occurred to me as you were saying that, because you were so young. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I've never thought of it that way. But you're right. My faith wasn't really matured other than knowing that there was a God and that he was there for me. This, I forgot to mention, I actually had open heart surgery when I was 15 months old. So
Mhm.
I grew up with people saying all the time, you're a miracle, you're here for a reason, God has a big purpose for you. Um, and all of these very loving and encouraging things, but it was also kind of a weight on me, like,
Mhm.
well, if he cares so much about me, if I'm such this miracle, if he has such big plans for me, why doesn't he listen to me? Why doesn't he answer my prayers? Why doesn't he care that much about me? So it was just kind of like this layered thing of, I guess, my distorted vision of who God was, and how he loved me or didn't. And then of course it plays into it how we can sometimes see God the Father as we see our own fathers. And my dad,
Yeah.
for I love my dad and I've forgiven him for all these things. And he was struggling. He also struggled with addiction, as well. But, I saw God as this disinterested person, like my dad was. Like he wasn't really there for me. He was never really there for me. I knew he loved me, but he just couldn't be the dad that I wanted him to be. And I just kind of felt like maybe God's not the God I wanted him to be either. When I went to high school, I had a best friend, and she and I were really great friends, like seventh and eighth grade. We were kind of inseparable and everything. And then freshman year of high school, we were both excited. We go in, and she basically told me at that moment, like, we are not hanging out anymore. We are not friends anymore. It's not that I don't like you or whatever, but I just want to make a new group of friends, and I just want to like do my own thing. And, you're kind of weighing me down is basically what I
Wow,
heard
yeah.
from that. Yeah. So I was like, okay, like, what am I going to do? I didn't really have any other friends. I just kind of hung out with her and whoever she hung out with. So I just kind of like floated along. I felt very alone. I was involved in dance team, but other than being at dance team, I still felt like I didn't really have any friends. I would I kind of like tried to insert myself into different groups like at lunchtime. And then my sophomore year in high school, one of the captains of our dance team was having a party, and she invited our whole dance team. And so I was so excited. I told my mom about it. It was a sleepover. And I went to it, and my best friend, my former best friend, she was there too. we had kind of like ironed things out, but we still didn't like hang out or whatever. And we were there, and when I walked in, so her house was like this big house, but we weren't in the main house. They actually had like a house, like probably like a guest house or
Okay.
something.
Yeah.
And that's where we were. When I walked in, oh my gosh, it was full of teenagers, guys, girls, and drinks, like tons of alcohol. So her parents obviously supplied all of this and did
Hmm.
all this. And my mom never would have dropped me off if she would have known that. But
Yeah.
that was the moment. So I drank, I had fun, I passed out. Like, I don't really remember that much
Hmm.
about it. What I do know is it was in that moment that I realized alcohol gives me a community. Alcohol makes helps me be who I want to be. Alcohol makes me more attractive to boys. It's this magic elixir that is giving me everything my teenage mind ever dreamed of. And so that began my journey of just drinking. Like I would go to parties and stuff. And honestly, it was this key that got me into another group of friends. We they're great people, but we just partied like when parents wouldn't be home, and some of the parents were okay with us drinking. Some of them would buy it for us and be home with us when we were drinking. And it was almost like an every weekend thing where we were drinking. And, it was great. I thought it was like the best thing ever because I had, again, everything I ever wanted. Like I had made this happen, and alcohol helped me make it happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Back to that controlling,
yeah,
making it, doing it yourself. Yes. Yes.
yeah. And that was all great and good and everything. And I'm not saying like I didn't make stupid decisions. I mean, really stupid decisions. Like I had a boyfriend my senior year, and we had been friends for a really long time or whatever. And he's a great guy. I don't have any animosity towards him. But I, because I was in that circle of friends, a lot of them were hooking up or having sex with their boyfriends and whatever. And I wasn't. But they would say they wouldn't want to tell me stuff because they're like, "Oh, you're so pure and innocent." So they wouldn't want to tell me stuff. I felt excluded. I felt like I didn't know what was going on. And so I just told my boyfriend, I'm like, we're having sex and we're doing this. And he was not opposed to it. So, but it wasn't because I loved him. It was
Right.
because I needed to lose my virginity so that they would tell me stuff so that I could be included again, another controlling thing that I had to do to unlock another level of this game that I was playing. It just began this journey of promiscuity, not honoring my body, not honoring my mom because I would just do like all kinds of things that were not, I was lying to her about where I was, what I was doing, and all of those things. And then after we graduated from high school, so many of my friends left, and I was left in town with that best friend. She invited me to I've actually never shared this. She invited me to a tailgate party at the university that we went to. And we drank so much. Like I drove down there, we drank so much. I lost her at some point, or she left me. I don't remember. I was so drunk and I was just like wandering the streets, like not knowing where my car was or where she was, how I was going to get home because I was in a completely different area than where I lived. And I passed out at some point in a yard and I was throwing up. And I just remember this man and woman stopping, and I was just throwing up and throwing up. And she was like, get in the car. Like, where can we take you? We want to help you. And I was like, I don't even know. And this friend's boyfriend lived like in that area. I have no idea how I directed them to their house, but I did. And I went in there and they're like, yeah, you can stay here. But then I was like, I passed out there and I started throwing up all over the place. And his roommate's girlfriend was like, she's got to go. Like, she's got to go. So I was out on the streets again, but I ended up finding my keys in my pocket, getting in my car and driving home, which sounds horrible. Like, I am so embarrassed that I did that. And thanks be to God, like nothing happened and I got home. But when I was driving, I sensed like somebody else with me. Like, I felt like I had like my guardian angel with me, or, and in that moment, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, what is happening? What is happening? And even though I still kept drinking and doing all these things, I started realizing like this isn't high school anymore. This isn't us friends, like somewhere. Like, I could have died. That's why I was throwing up so much. My body was like, you're gonna die if you keep this in your body. So I moved, and it was great for a while. Like, I didn't drink or anything because I didn't have any connections. I was underage. I was 19. And so I moved and it was good. But then, of course, as we do when we're addicted, we just kind of gravitate to those people who are going to give us what we are looking for, which
Right.
for me was alcohol and a community. Really, for me, it came down to a community. Like, that's what alcohol was, my in to having a community, to having people who liked me and valued me. And I started partying a lot and everything. And then I found these other two roommates, and we lived together, we partied, it was all this. But essentially, to make a long story short, which I know is too late, but I ended up, they got tired of me too, even like after all of our partying and all of our stuff, and they moved out. So here I am alone in this apartment, just like, what am I going to do next? And I just kept drinking, drank myself into a blackout. And then one night I woke up feeling like I was being strangled. Like, I couldn't breathe. And I like looked up, and there was like this big, like black shadowy figure over me. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. Like, I'm sure this happened in like a split second, but to me, it's just like I can just see it play out. And I was just like, I can't breathe. Like, I am going to die. And then all of a sudden, like, this lighter figure like came up over it, like, and said like, not yet. And then they both like disappeared. And then immediately I like gasped for air, and my heart was racing, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what just happened?
Yeah.
It was so scary. So I wish I could say that I was like, okay, never again, no more alcohol, I'm going back to church, like, this is not for me. And I did not do that. But I will say that was the moment that I realized maybe God is fighting for me. Like, even like the other stuff that happened, even with like almost like dying in somebody's front yard, throwing up, it was actually in this moment because I felt his spirit with me, that I was like, maybe he does care and maybe he is fighting for me. And I continued to drink and go out, and people got tired of me. And so I would go move on to my next roommate. I think I moved like 13 times in like 10 years. I don't know. It was
I
just
do
like,
remember that. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah,
There's
it
no
was
honor,
crazy.
no honor among thieves, right?
There is not, for sure, for sure. And so, yeah, but I had this one roommate, and her mom was my boss, and her mom told me, like, Christy, if you don't get a handle on your drinking, I'm gonna have to fire you. And my roommate said, if you don't stop drinking, you have to leave. So I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna lose my place to live again and my job, which I loved my job. So that was like a big hit.
A heavenly tag team.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So I was like, okay, fine. What do I do? Okay, I'll call my insurance and get into like, I got into an outpatient treatment thing at my medical facility, whatever. And I got there and I hated it. Like it was so dumb, I thought. But I learned a lot there, even though I thought it was so dumb. But I would just like look at people all judgy and be like, well, I'm not like them. They've gotten a DUI. They've lost their family. They've lost their job. Well, I almost did, but they like really did. And I would just be like, I'm not there. And why am I even here? But just like get through it so that everything will go back to normal and people will get off your back, basically, is what I was
Right.
doing.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so I did that, but I continued to do the exact same things that I had always done, which is go out with my friends because I love to go to country bars and go line dancing and stuff like that. So I would go and do that. But at the same time, it wasn't that fun that I was, since I wasn't drinking and I was there and I was just like glaring at everybody because they were drinking and I wasn't. And so it wasn't fun for me and it wasn't fun for them probably either. And so after I completed that, I I remember I was like, in a bathroom, like crying and so mad. And my roommate came in and I was like, I'm just so mad because I'm not drinking and everybody else is having fun. She's like, fine, just drink then. Who cares? And I was like, great, I will. So I did. And I kept drinking for a little bit longer. But then I don't know. I, God was just chasing me down. Like he was on me and he was just like, you are going to die if you don't stop. Like what is there for you if you keep going this way? What is your life going to be like? You say you want a family. You say you want kids. You say you want, like all these things. Like that was all I ever wanted was to be a mom, a wife and a mom. That's all I've ever wanted in life. And he was like, you're not going to get that living like this.
Exactly.
And so one day I was just like, okay, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm going to get like my favorite alcohol. I'm just going to drink myself until I pass out. I'm going to wake up the next morning and I'm not going to drink again. Like this is how it's going to go down. And that is exactly what I did. Thanks be to God. And I told my mom later what had happened and she was like, "Oh my gosh, Christy, do you know what day that is?" And I was like, no. She's like, was the 10th anniversary of your grandmother's passing. And my grandma and I were super, super close. I loved her so much. She passed away when I was 13 from breast cancer. And like, I didn't want to screw it up because in that moment, I could feel her intercession. Like, when my mom said that, I was like, she was interceding for me. Like, she made it so that maybe God heard me for once. Like, I don't know, but she's so close to God that, I mean, he couldn't deny her. So I just knew that I had to stick with it. And then my mom also had a friend from high school who was involved in AA for many years. And she came into town and they talked to me. She talked to me. She took me to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, which was like in a different area of from where I live. But we went there and it was a great group. Like I wish that I had continued with that group because it was a great group. They were so like encouraging and loving. And I just felt I don't know, I just felt really good about my experience there. So it was a really good first step. But then she told me, like, okay, now what you have to do is you need to go find the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in your area and go to that. I was like, oh, great. Okay. And I didn't really want to do that, like at all, but I did. So I looked it up and I found a meeting and I drove there and I sat in my car and I was like, I am not going in. Like, I do not want to do this. Like, nothing in me wants to do this at all. But somehow I just ended up like walking in there and sitting down. And eventually I shared my story and I told them, I wouldn't be here right now if God hadn't carried me in here because I was out in my car and I did not want to come in. First of all, I didn't want to drive here. But then once I got into the parking lot, I for sure did not want to come in here. But here I am sitting before you, and I can only say that that was God. And that was the first time I think I've ever given God the credit for something that happened to me.
I think that you have given voice to so many things that people fear or that people experience with addictions, whether it be alcohol, food, drugs, cigarettes, any number of addictions. And you express the fear, you express the worry. Just the sitting in your car, I know I can relate to that, just not wanting to go in. The sitting there in judgment. Now, I know it wasn't at the meetings, but it was at the outpatient treatment, sitting there and being judgy, holier than thou almost. And I remember being in meetings saying, well, why am I attending these meetings? I'm not as bad as these people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I was as bad as these people, or they were, it's not that we were bad, we were sick and
Right.
we had an addiction. And the truth is that addiction can be different for everybody and it can manifest itself differently. And one person's bottom is different than another person's bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to walk the same path to be an addict. You don't have to do the same things or get the same arrest tickets and things like that. You don't have to experience everything the same to be an addict and to need that help. So I thank you for giving voice to all of that, and I really hope that somebody is listening who needs to hear that they're not alone and that they're not different. That we're all special and we're all different in God's eyes, but in a way, we're all the same. We're all just trying to figure it out. We're all just,
Mm-hmm.
so thank you for that. I appreciate that. So moving forward, was that the end of your drinking and the beginning of your actual sobriety as opposed to, it being different than from the treatment center, which obviously wasn't a wholehearted attempt.
Right. I will say that it was a good experience. I'm so glad that I had that community because I really needed it at that time. And I learned a lot of things like through it and met a lot of really, really great people. And of course, the biggest blessing was, as they say in AA, hearing other people share their experience, strength, and hope. Because, like you alluded to, just knowing that you're not the only one is so, it just feels so good. And you're right, you don't have to experience, we all have different bottoms. I'm blessed that I had a low bottom compared to some people. And me sitting there judging those people like, oh my gosh, well, I don't have that, or that's never happened to me. I could have gotten there. It
Yeah.
it
Mhm.
was like just one thing could have gotten me there. And so for me to sit there in judgment, which I didn't understand, again, I was young and I wasn't really um, there for the right reasons. But I think I didn't feel that way when I went to the AA meetings. Like I wasn't looking at those people in judgment. Instead, I was looking at them like, wow, like that could have been my story. That could have happened to me. And thank God they stopped now, that they've found their sobriety. The thing that killed me the most when I was there was seeing people that I loved and I looked up to go back out. It was just like this really hard thing. And that happened with my sponsor. So when you have a sponsor, you share very, very intimate things with them, especially as you're doing like your fourth step. And she went MIA like shortly after that. And I just felt like another abandonment, to be quite honest with you, in that time. And so again, that self-reliance came. I don't need a sponsor. I don't need anybody. And I decided I didn't need AA eventually as well. I actually had an experience before I left AA. It was like I was probably a few months sober and I was still having the urge to drink. And I cried out to God. I was like, Lord, you have to remove this urge. You have to remove this urge to drink, or I am not going to make it. And he did. And from that moment on, I have never had the urge to drink alcohol again. It doesn't
Praise
mean
God.
that I don't get in my brain and feel
Yes.
like, oh, I'm the only one not drinking or any of those
Yeah.
types of things. But I've never had that physical urge or any compulsion. Like I felt like I was going to drink. Thanks be to God. That's a grace. That is a grace for sure. I still had a lot of life to clean up. Like things didn't get perfect just because I stopped drinking. And on the
Rarely
contrary,
does. Yes.
yeah, on the contrary, I got 13th step. I actually married a man that I met in AA. Yeah, yeah. Wait, go, Christy. You're making like we can't make all the good choices.
I tried to do
And
that too. I did try to do that too.
yeah, yeah. That turned out to be a disaster.
As far as I know, he's still a wonderful man today, but it didn't work out for probably very good reasons. So
Yeah,
yes.
I guess. I just desired marriage and family so bad that like the first person that like took care of me, like he did swoop in, take care of me, like we're gonna figure out your bills, we're gonna figure out, this and that. I don't, I would never take it back because I feel like it led me to where I am today. Like, but I did have a lot of life to clean up again, and it didn't become so much about drinking or trying not to drink. It became about how do I build the life that I desire now? So honestly, like drinking just kind of took a back seat. Like the fact that I used to tell everybody, like, I'm a recovering alcoholic. Like I would tell everybody that I met because I was like, the more people that know, the less likely I'm gonna drink because then they'll be like, why are you drinking? I thought you were an alcoholic. Like, what is going on? So, but then pretty soon I stopped talking about it and I wasn't helping anyone, which is one of the 12 step, like give it, you have freely been given this, you need to give it to someone else. And I wasn't really doing that either because I wasn't really sharing what I had been through. And so even if I wasn't going to become a sponsor, sometimes just sharing your story can really encourage and change the trajectory of someone's life because the Holy Spirit takes that and just like works it out for their good. Then I met my awesome husband and we got married. I was 10 years sober by the time we were married. Not 10 years sober, 7 years sober when we were married. So it was kind of just part of my life and people just knew me as a non-drinker. And I celebrated my 25th year of sobriety. And my mom and my husband would always remember my sobriety date. They'd be like, great job, or give me flowers, or, call me, text me, give me a card, all these things. And I'd be like, yeah, thanks. It was just kind of like this thing that was like nothing to me, which is so crazy to me to think about now because I would not have the life I have today if I didn't have my sobriety.
Exactly.
Yet I was taking it for granted, like we take God for granted, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
like one of those things. And my mom gave me a coin for my 25th year of sobriety. And I was like, oh, that's nice. I haven't received a coin since I was 2 years sober. This is so nice. It was in a pretty box and I put it on my shelf and thought, that's good. Well, at this time, I had a digital marketing business and I was working with a Catholic business coach and trying to figure out like how to amp that up and what I needed to do and all of those things. And then one day I told her, like, I don't know, like, I feel really called to coaching. And she's like, great. Who are you going to coach? And I was like, I don't know. So she's like, well, pray about it. So I was like, okay. So I was like thinking of all these people, like Catholic moms, people like I could coach businesses, like, that want to do digital marketing. Like I had this whole list of things. But then when my mom had given me that coin and I was sitting down to work, I remember looking at it being like God was like, that's who you're coaching. That's who you are coaching because you know that there's a lot of mess to clean up, a lot of mental mess that you have to clean up when you stop drinking. And so I was like, oh yeah. So life coaching, not necessarily like a recovery coach, but I only wanted to coach women who had like a year or more sober because I wanted them to have like their foundation of recovery and then we can work on the life stuff because that first year, as you know, is just like bonkers, right?
Yes.
So you just are trying to get your feet under you again.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yes.
after that, then you can start looking at these like relationships and jobs and finances and all these types of things. And so that's what I went all in on. Like I'm this recovery coach and this is what I do, basically like a life coach for women in recovery. And then God started showing me these women who weren't like me. They were, or I thought they weren't like me, were a lot of like in a lot of areas, but not in alcohol. But he was showing me these women who did not have, like, they weren't alcoholics, right? They didn't have a drinking problem per se, but it was definitely becoming a problem for them. It was taking up so much of their time, their space, their energy. And I realized that they were drinking for the same reason that I did. So many of them was to be part of a community and to cover up that trauma, right? We're trying to like heal ourselves with this substance that's essentially poisoning us. But yet we keep turning to it time and time again. So I was like, you know what? I'm not that different from them because I was trying to heal my wounds with alcohol and I was trying to be part of a community with alcohol. And I was afraid to stop drinking because I didn't want to lose that community. And that's what they're afraid of also. But these women were different because they have it pretty much together in all other areas of their life. Like maybe they're homeschoolers, maybe they're business owners, maybe they're, like all of these things, but they're like, why can't I get this? And they're beating themselves up over it. And God just kept showing me them over and over again. And I was like, I need to help them too. There's nobody, at least in the Catholic space, there's lots of other sobriety coaches, secular and otherwise. But I did feel God telling me, like, I want you to focus on Catholic specifically, but Christian women in general. Like, people don't have to be Catholic to work with me. They just don't have to be, they can't be anti-Catholic. How about that? So,
Yes, that would be a barrier. Yes.
yeah, it makes things very uncomfortable and awkward. So, yeah. So I was like, okay, so this is what I'm doing. And all of a sudden, when you finally get what God is just like, he's like leaving all these holy breadcrumbs and you're picking them up and
Mm-hmm.
picking them up and it just doesn't quite make sense. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden it makes sense. And then you're like, oh, like,
And the angels saying yes.
yeah, it did. And so then things became so much easier. And through this process, my journey back to the Catholic Church is a whole nother story, but I will say that it's very intertwined. And through like the past year, especially, and and it's been happening all along, but especially in this past year, I've really been able to say, like, you have this self-reliance that you've had from the time you were 6 years old, and you need to let it go because God has never let you down. He has always been there for you. Look at all the ways He protected you. Look at all the ways that He was actually with you. And when I do this exercise, like, Jesus, where were you with me when? I can see Him with me, hurting with me, loving me, being there with me, weeping with me, being, just there the whole time, like, hey, I'm here. But I wasn't looking at Him, but He was still there, never leaving me. And I've been able to trust and let go of that um, self-reliance because so many times I felt like that trust was betrayed by people who I gave that trust to who didn't deserve it.
Right.
But I was withholding it from the one who would never betray it.
Mm. Isn't so now I have chills. You can't see them in the sweater, but but yeah, you wanted this, you had this self-reliance and you wanted this community. That's almost a dichotomy in and of itself
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
you want to do everything on your own, but yet you want to be welcomed and involved in a community, and that's got to be a struggle in and of
Hmm.
itself. But then there would, and I'm probably going to have to let it go, or maybe you know what, maybe that was it. You said that you had to let it go because you were giving this trust to people who didn't deserve it, and then the one person who was there the whole time you didn't give it to. And
Hmm.
I just remember somebody was saying, and I can't remember who it was, but um, that God never forces Himself.
Hmm.
He invites, and he'll stand there and he'll wait. He'll knock, or he'll leave those breadcrumbs that you mentioned. Um, but He doesn't force His way in. He waits for you
Hmm.
to let Him in and to
Hmm.
encourage. And I just think that's so beautiful. I realize that some people struggle with that. Well, why doesn't God just step in and do it?
Hmm.
But then that takes away our free will and it takes away the definition of love. We have to, we're given the choice to love Him, we're not forced to, because then it's not real love.
Right.
But
Yeah, it's kind of like when I was coming back to the church and my husband was going through RCIA and we had a priest um, that was kind of helping us through it, but he was never like shaming, like, you guys should not be doing this. And like, we weren't married in the church. We needed to have our marriage convalidated. He was very loving with how he would say things. If he had approached it in that way where it was where my husband felt forced or like I have to do this, then it would have just completely, made him feel adverse to whatever he had to say. And I think that God, that's one of the reasons that God is like that. We have to come to it on our own. If He forces our hand, like you said, if we don't have free will, then it's not real love. If He
Mhm.
forces our hand or we feel like we don't have the choice in it, then it just takes away from it. It's not ours anymore. We don't learn those lessons along the way that we're supposed to learn. Like, I would never take away any ounce of pain, of suffering, of anything I endured, of the confusion, of anything, because it it led me to where I am. It led me to who I am and whose I am.
exactly.
And it took me a
Yes.
long, long, long time to get there. And I'm sure God was like, Christy, come on, girl, you gotta get this. Like, you're so close. And then I'd be like, la la la, like picking flowers somewhere else and, whatever. But I think that being able to go through that and look back at it, it provides so much just awareness of who God is and how much He actually loves me. But even more so, it helps me express that to others because I feel like that is one of the things He's especially called me to is, like we put our identity in the things that we do and things that we have so that we can be somebody, right? And that's like the biggest lie from the beginning of time. Eve, eat this apple so that you can be like God. And, but you have to do this. We don't have to do anything. Like God just loves us for who we are. We don't have to strive for Him. And I just want women to know like your confidence doesn't come from your friend group. It doesn't come from a substance that you're using to rely on to cope. I get it. Like I get it. There's things that I have in my, like, sometimes I'll overeat sugar or, when I'm upset or like, I have things too. I love playing games on my phone, but then I'm like, oh, I'm just buffering. This is keeping me from what God wants me to do. And when we look at it, we're like, I am numbing out from this life that I prayed for. I am numbing out from this family that I wished for. What am I doing? But, it's because we're like comparing ourselves to worldly standards instead of God's standards. Because for God, our identity is just who we are because He loves us.
Amen to that. And I was going to ask you for some warrior words for our listeners, but you just gave us some beautiful ones.
Thank you.
So, so then with that, how can people work with you? And like, are you taking on coaching clients? And like, I guess, how can they come find you if they're interested?
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me say. So, first of all, I would love it if anybody listened to my podcast, the Catholic Sobriety Podcast. You can go there. I try to upload or publish new episodes every week. I have great guests that are really, really helpful. So, you don't always have to take my word for things. You can actually hear from other people and other perspectives in dealing with different things. But to work with me, I work with people in a couple of different ways. I do one-on-one coaching, as you mentioned, and you can always book a consultation with me so that we can just kind of chat about, is coaching right for you? Sometimes we're not in the stage of readiness for change, but we are in a position of the stage, where we need more information. So in those discovery calls or inquiry calls, I really like to give people a whole picture so that they can leave, whether they work with me or not, having a plan, knowing what they need to do next to move to the next stage of readiness and realize, is coaching right for me or not? The other way is I have what is called the Sacred Sobriety Lab. I'm actually relaunching it in January 1st. I'm redoing it. I launched it last December. I got some great feedback from my founding members. I'm simplifying some things. And I'm so excited because I'm adding to it group coaching, weekly group coaching, and a community, because we need community
Community, yes.
of other women who will encourage you, support you, pray for you, and hold you accountable as much as you want them to. And group coaching is so amazing because whether or not you bring something to coaching, you will always learn by hearing other people get coached as well. And they might bring up something you've never thought of. And then you're like, oh my gosh, that was so helpful for me. So I'm really excited about that. And it's a more affordable option for people that do want coaching, but one-on-one coaching is a little out of their price range. So it's a great place to start. It's a great place to be. And yeah, I hope that you'll check it out. So you can find all the information at the CatholicSobrietyCoach.com. There's a link there for the lab, and there's a link there to book a consultation with me as well.
So that lab is starting January 1st. Do they have to get on a waiting list, or can they come in after January 1st, or is it
Yes.
only you have to start here and yeah, how does
Yeah,
that work?
that's a great question. So people can sign up for it now. It's just not going to be live until January 1st. And I haven't decided if for the time being, I'm just gonna keep it open at least through the month of January so people can join whenever they want to. But right now, I'm taking, if people want to, if they're like, yes, I'm in, you can sign up now. And then the content, the coaching, and the community will all be available beginning January 1st so that you can start 2025 just having a plan. Oh, and the lab, they get 12-month access to it. So you have a whole year because I know if sometimes when you have like a really short time frame, it can be daunting because if you
Mhm.
don't start it off like you really want it to, then you like quit, or I do anyway. If I don't start it off how I want it, like I want to, then
Mhm.
sometimes I'll just quit because I'm like, oh, it didn't go like I wanted it to, and now I've failed because my brain is sneaky like that. But
I
if you
think
have a whole
a lot
year,
of ours are, yes.
yeah. So if you have a whole year, you can start over as many times as you want. You don't have to feel like anything. And it's not, there's no strict guidelines. I never tell anybody what to do. It's about finding the level of sobriety that is right for you. Like for me and for Heather, our level of sobriety is 0. Like we don't drink. But for some people, you can choose to drink. And the way I define that is you have peace in your choice to take it or leave it. If it's causing any kind of chaos, that's a red flag that you need to maybe eliminate it.
It's a good defining line there. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the explanation of that, and I think that's very helpful. Um, So with that, I want to thank you. Thank you for your time and sharing your vulnerability, sharing that one story that you said you hadn't shared before. I appreciate your vulnerability with that. And then just giving of your time and listening to God, sharing your story with other women, and coaching them through their life and their sobriety. So thank you, Christy. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you for providing me this space and also just for everything you're doing for your listeners and just the people that do get to come on here and share their stories.
Thank you. I love how Christy shared her story with us. Well, that's the purpose of this podcast, to share our stories with others and connect our experiences. But she mentioned that in her recovery, she neglected that aspect of it. She put it on the back burner. But God kept nudging her, reminding her that others needed to hear her story until two of those nudges collided. And she realized what God was trying to tell her. Her mother's gift of a 25-year sobriety coin gave her the answer to her prayer about her calling to coach. But those aren't the only breadcrumbs that God left for Christy. From the time she was 6 years old until she was 25 years sober, he was there, guiding, protecting, inviting, loving, all while allowing her the free will to see and choose to love him back. Reminds me of the parable or story Jesus told, as recorded in Luke chapter 15. He told his disciples of a shepherd who, having lost one of his 100 sheep, leaves the 99 who had never wandered off to go in search of the one who did wander. Even though Christy had wandered off the path, away from the safety she didn't realize she had, even though she went in search of a community who would welcome and love her the way she thought they should, our Good Shepherd still pursued her. He protected her. He guided her. He offered her the love and community she needed. Her path may have been crooked, The actions she chose were not the best or the healthiest. But with the loving pursuit of our Good Shepherd, she found her way home. And now she is being the hands and feet of Jesus, coaching others to find their way back to the life God has for them. And I love how she is now providing a safe and nurturing community, that one thing she longed for in her own group coaching program. If this sounds like a community you need or just want to explore, regardless of what month you're listening to this, please go to her website and check out her Sacred Sobriety Lab. It just might be the community you need to bring you back to where you need to be. So have you wandered off the path you are supposed to be on? What is one step you can take to get you back toward the right path again? Something to think about this week. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.